You're always communicating verbally and non-verbally. So I can think of a number of times when I was working with couples in couple counseling, and they seemed like they were doing okay in the waiting room, and they come in and they sit down. Now, mind you, I thought, this is going to be a pretty good session. It seemed like they were interacting okay in the waiting room, I turned my back for like 10 seconds, and I looked back, and I can tell by their nonverbal expressions, they're madder than heck at each other. Now, nobody has said a thing. How did that happen? Well, let's take it personal. Do you think you could go home or to some relationship that you have a history in, and without saying a word, you could start a fight? Could you look at the person a certain way? Could you just do the thing that that pushes their buttons? I mean, if you really wanted to fight, just to liven things up a little, could you start one without even using language? And the answer for most of us is, yeah, absolutely. Right? And in fact, kids learn how to do this at a very early age. So any of you that have kids know this. Like by age 2, they already knew how to push your buttons whenever. If they couldn't get your positive attention, they knew how to get it negatively, didn't they? And they knew which button to go for. And they also knew that sometimes mom and dad had different buttons. So if mom was there, they'd push that one. But if dad was there, they'd push the different one. But it still worked because they had figured it out. Okay, so what we found out in research on relationship and communication is about 75% of the message is carried in the nonverbals. It doesn't matter what you're saying. What's more important is how did you say it? What did you not say? What was all your verbal communication? What was your body posture and so forth, right? And so very often we are unaware of what we are communicating nonverbally. And very often we'll send a message which we think is just the words, and somebody else gets maybe even the opposite message because of the nonverbals. Okay? So I walk up to Deb and I say, "Hey Deb, how you doing today?" And Deb says, "Just great." So what did that mean? So I heard her say just great, but the way she said it didn't sound like she was doing that good. Which one am I supposed to believe? Well, if you follow your brain typically is going to believe the most negative message first. All right? But it's also typically going to believe the nonverbals before it believes the verbals. Now, because we all have different life stories, we all respond to the same nonverbals differently. So if I could talk to any one of you critically in the exact tone of voice that one of the significant others, like mom or dad or a teacher or a coach, did to you when you were a kid and you hated it, if I could just pull up that tone of voice accidentally or on purpose, guess what? I would trigger a response in you just like that. Does that make sense? And I don't even know what the heck I tapped into, and I might not even have wanted to tap into that. It's just that my voice tone was accidentally like somebody in your life story from the past. So now I'm going to get a reaction that doesn't make any sense to me in the context of the present relationship. And I'm going, geez, what the heck's the matter with them? Right? But what do I know? I'm missing information. See, whenever anybody's behavior looks crazy to you, it's because you're missing information. And the only person that can give you the information you're missing is the other person. But you would have to be in possession of your own reactions enough so that you would be willing to be curious rather than defensive and let them teach you what the reaction meant. Okay, so now we get these messages then that are carried on two levels, verbal and nonverbal. And very often it turns out to be a mixed message, meaning that what's going on one level is contradicted by what's going on the other level, and what the heck am I supposed to do with that? Okay? I mean, I tell kids in class at Stout, I used to say, well, you want to mess with somebody's mind a little bit on this stuff, just do it really, really obviously. So I tell the young women in class, look, the next time a guy comes up and asks you out, do this. I'd love to go out with you. And then just wait and see what happens. Okay, now that's a very direct mixed message, right? So what do you do with that? Now, can you think of any time we usually have some people in our life who are really good at mixed messages. You know what it does? You see, the great thing about a mixed message is it gives you plausible deniability. In other words, you can say, I never said that. And you give them back the exact words you said. But the way you said it or all your nonverbals contradicted what you said. You see how complex relationships are getting here? Okay, but now we're going to simplify this. Somebody sends you a mixed message and you don't know what the heck to do with it. So what you're going to do is you're going to try to create with them what we call a shared meaning. So let's talk about how things can go awry. Have you ever had this experience? You send somebody an itty-bitty, innocent little message, and they hear a whopping big negative message. In other words, it feels to you like they're hearing stuff that you never said. Does that happen? It happens sometimes when people are having a bad day. They just read in all kinds of stuff that wasn't even there. Has that happened to you ever? Well, the opposite can happen. You send somebody a really big, important message, and all they hear is a tiny little insignificant message. Now, this is frustrating, isn't it? Because, you see, this message was really important to you. And they don't get it. And that feels like what? Doesn't that feel like rejection or something? Or, you know, like they don't care? And now you're going to get weird, aren't you? Because when people get rejected and feel like somebody doesn't care, they start to get weird. And now this could go really awry unless, what? You see, you have to recognize that the problem we have here is that the message sent was not the message received. And so if this is important to us, we have to create a shared meaning before we continue. Because if we continue with this, we're going to build misunderstanding on top of misunderstanding, and now things get even more hopeless than they were initially. So the way we do this is pretty simple, and that is, I'll give you two ways to do it. First, we'll talk about the shared meaning. So we got these two people. A says something to B, and typically B says something back to A, and then A says something back to B. Whoop, this should be A. Okay. Now, we don't know for sure whether the message sent here is the message received, and most of the time we're just talking at kind of a social level, and it really doesn't matter that much whether the message sent was the same as the message received or not. But what about when there's starting to be misunderstanding, starting to be communication breakdown, starting to be the beginning of a conflict? Now it becomes incredibly important that the message sent is the message received, that you really are hearing each other, right? And so to do that, before B can send a message back to A, B has to send the message back to A here. They don't get to say anything of their own awareness. They're going to prove to A that they fully understood what A said. Have you ever noticed what it's like when you can make somebody feel fully understood? Like you're really upset about something, and you come in and you start dumping your upsetness all over me, and I just listen. And then I can say back to you what I'm hearing you say, and I say, am I understanding you okay? And let's say I really got it, I nailed it, you know. Now you feel totally understood. What happens inside you at that moment in time? Don't you start to relax a little bit? Don't you start to feel a little safer? Well, you see, another magical thing happens, and that's got to do with a little expression that we'll encounter again, which is accepting what is changes what is. If I can fully accept you exactly as you are right now, guess what happens? You no longer have to sell it to me, and you no longer have to defend it. All of a sudden now there's a little pause, a little quietness where you go deeper and something different comes out. Have you ever noticed in conflicts, if you listen to an ongoing conflict between two people, the truth of the matter is they keep doing the same thing over and over. It's like they've each said it to each other 10 times already, but they're still saying it. And you kind of go, well, that's kind of a waste of time, energy, and effort, isn't it? You know, so what if you could fully accept what they just said to you and they feel fully understood? They have to let go of that now because you've already got that part. You follow what I'm saying? They no longer sell that part. They no longer defend that part. Now something new has to arise, and that's going to move this in some new direction. Well, this goes back to what you're going to do here. The way I'm going to accept what is, to change what is I'm going to make you feel fully understood. And I'm going to do that by sending the message back and asking you to confirm that I understand it or to clarify what I didn't get right. And I'll keep sending it back. You're the expert on your own message until you are able to say to me, yes, Don, I think you got it. I think you understand now. Then at that point, I have permission to go forward. Right? Now, I do a lot of work in mediation, and basically what I'm doing is this. I'm making both people do this. Because what happens when they talk to each other is they start with a misunderstanding, this one or this one, and nobody clears it up, so the message sent was never the message received, and now they go on to the next message, which is also misunderstood, and then they do the third message, and that's also misunderstood. So now we have at least three. You see how misunderstanding's building on misunderstanding, building on misunderstanding. It's no wonder that we can't break through this and find a mutually satisfying outcome, right? Because the way we do that is we create understanding. So that's called a shared meaning. Now, in the context of the mixed message. Deb, how you doing today? Just great. Watch what I'm going to do now. Deb, I heard you say that you're doing just great, but the way you said it to me made me think that maybe something's not okay. Are you really okay? So I send back both messages, the verbal one and the nonverbal one, and I ask for clarification. All right? Now that could stop a lot of fights right there. Because have you ever noticed a lot of fights actually begin with somebody sending you a mixed message? And you automatically grab the most negative part, which is usually the nonverbal part, and you run with it. And then you respond to that part, but they have plausible deniability because now you're pretending they said something which they never did say in words. Do you follow what I'm saying? Okay, so we have, how do you break through that? That's one technique you can use. But you got to be aware of the verbal and the nonverbal aspects of it. So when I was training to be a therapist, just to give you an idea how far you can take this, I had to videotape myself counseling a client, and I was going to have to bring this videotape in and sit down with a counseling professor, and this is very intimidating because you know what your greatest fear is that this counseling professor is going to say, that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen a counselor ever try to do with a client. I don't even know why you're in this profession. Maybe you should get out and go do something else. That's what your fear is, right? That you're just no good at this. But so I walk in and I got my first tape there, and she became a mentor to me, and she sat me down and she said, okay, Don, let's look at your tape, but I don't want you to look at yourself at all. Okay? You're just going to focus on the client. Okay, so I thought, oh, okay, I can do that. And then she said, but I don't want you to listen to anything the client says. Okay, now I'm getting a little bit uncomfortable here because I don't know where this is going. And she says, what I want you to do, Don, is I want you to listen to everything except the words and tell me what you hear. Oh, wow. Now think about that. Now those of you that have kids, this would be a great exercise for you if you really want to have your kid feel understood, right? They come to you and they start talking. You're going to totally tune in. They have your undivided attention, and now you're really listening to everything except the words to see what you hear. Why would we want to do that? Because remember, we said 75% of the message is carried in the nonverbals. So if you want to get to what's really going on with a person, you pay close attention to the nonverbals. You pay just as much or more attention to the nonverbals as you do to the verbals. Now, when you do that, when you're working in therapy, I mean, you can cut to the chase so fast by being accurate about how you listen to somebody's nonverbals and then feeding them back the nonverbal. Not the words, but the nonverbals. And you do it tentatively. You say, I could be wrong, but see, when you said that, I heard sadness in your voice. If I'm right, guess what? We're into sadness now. I'm going to be very helpful to this person in a very short period of time because we got down to what's really going on. What's really going on is carried in the nonverbals. It's not carried in just the verbals. Okay. Let's take this one level deeper. People have triggers. This is something I don't think we talked about when we did this earlier. But I want you to be aware of this because the people you care about in your life have these. And some of them were put there at a very early age because of their life story. Now the triggers are what I call, these would be a couple of examples. And I'm guessing that if you really take a close look at yourself, you'll be able to identify some as I'm talking about this. A see-feel trigger. You see a certain thing, and it triggers in you an automatic emotional response. Okay? So what if I could look at you exactly the way your mother or your father looked at you that you really hated when they did that? Because you felt like it was judgmental, critical, or unaccepting. Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you know what that look is like? And isn't that an automatic trigger? You see it, and you automatically feel. Now, the truth of the matter is you've not been living with mom and dad for quite some time now, but somebody in the workplace could have the accidental experience of making the face that mom or dad used to make. What's going to happen to you? You're going to be back 5 years old or whenever it happened where you established that trigger, and you're going to have an automatic feel. And if the feeling was strong, now what happens when you have strong feelings? Well, you usually have automatic behaviors, right? That usually aren't helpful at that point. But it was because of the trigger. We can have hear-feel triggers. Do you have anybody in your life that if they really wanted to start a fight with you, the message they sent to you wouldn't matter as much as if they could get the exact tone right? And the way they say it just triggers something. Do you know what I'm talking about here? See, so this is about increasing your self-awareness, because what would be really helpful is you start to pay attention to what your triggers are. And if you want to decrease the number of unhelpful miscommunications, communication breakdown, conflict problems in any relationship, if you want to take it a step further, not only being aware of what your triggers are, could you be aware of what the other person's triggers are? Because when you live with somebody, I can tell you there are all kinds of accidental triggers, right? And some of them are see-feels, hear-feels, and there can be do-feels too, where they do a certain thing. And the other person feels like when you do it that way, you're telling the other person that the way they do it is wrong. Has this ever happened to you? See, that's a trigger, isn't it? Now, isn't this ridiculous? That we would act like, you see, there's a problem with this. And that is, if we do not identify our triggers, we're giving the other person way too much power. We're going to explore that here in a few minutes. In other words, we're letting somebody else determine what we're feeling, what we're about to do. It's really nice if you could not give people that power, if you would have enough choice to not be able to do that. So paying attention to nonverbal communication can be very powerful to break through some of that.